In 2023, during renovation work at a decommissioned RAF communications hub near Lincolnshire, a team of civilian contractors broke through a welded bulkhead and entered a sealed chamber untouched since the 1940s. Inside were rusted equipment racks, reels of magnetic tape, and steel crates marked Classified Operation Lysander. The Ministry of Defence initially denied the site's existence until photos of the find leaked online, showing emblems of the Air Ministry's research division and partially burned technical schematics labelled Reflective Wave Nullification Test, 1945. When the surviving documents were transferred to the National Archives under the Freedom of Information Act, several pages were redacted under Section 26, pertaining to national defence. But in the recovered fragments, investigators noticed references to human, observation protocols, and volunteer fatalities, unrecorded. What began as a routine restoration had unearthed the evidence of an operation the British government had spent 75 years trying to erase. Chapter 1. The Vault Beneath Runway 3C. The discovery at Lincolnshire began, as many revelations do, by accident. A small contracting company hired by the Ministry of Defence to prepare the site for redevelopment struck an anomaly beneath the cracked surface of runway 3C. Beneath 2 meters of reinforced concrete, ground-penetrating radar revealed an enclosed space measuring 12 by 20 feet. It was assumed to be an obsolete fuel reservoir until a steel hatch was uncovered, welded shut from the outside. When it was finally cut open under MOD supervision on June 4, 2023, a burst of cold, pressurized air spilled out, a stale breath from 1947. Inside lay rows of sealed metal containers, a corroded film projector, and 2 skeletal remains in RAF uniforms without identification tags. The first official report filed by Site Supervisor Mark Ridley noted the words OP Lysander, property of AMRD, stenciled on one of the crates. The acronym, traced later by historians, stood for Air Ministry Research Directorate, a division believed to have been disbanded in 1946. Among the scattered documents found on the concrete floor was a logbook signed Lit CMDR P. Hulden, 13th April 1945, containing a series of brief entries referencing tests labelled spectral reflection, chamber, and wing coating trials. What drew attention was a final note dated 2 days before Germany's surrender. Test unit stable, radiation minimal, volunteer response within expected range. Proceeding with night run, no record to be kept. The entry ended abruptly with an ink smear, as if the pen had been torn from his hand. The materials were transferred to the National Archives under file reference MOD MRD LYS 4578. But before public release, nearly half of the documents were withheld under security clause exemptions. Investigative journalist Sarah Delaney, who had spent years researching Britain's wartime experiments, filed a Freedom of Information request for access. The response, marked partially released, included blurred photocopies of diagrams depicting a crescent-shaped airframe, its surface coated with a lattice of overlapping metallic cells labelled Compound R17. When cross-referenced with known RAF projects, there was no record of any aircraft built under this designation. The only known reference appeared in a declassified memorandum from 1951, describing the disposal of experimental craft wreckage recovered near Aberystwyth, Wales, origin unacknowledged. Delaney visited the Lincolnshire site in late 2023, by then surrounded by security fencing and posted guards. A local worker she interviewed off-camera claimed that 2 weeks after the discovery, men in unmarked vans arrived and removed the crates under armed escort. He described one container that emitted a faint hum when moved, as if some inner mechanism was still active. No such object appeared in the official recovery manifest later released by the MOD. Satellite imagery of the base taken the following month showed new excavation trenches where the vault entrance had been, now filled and covered in gravel. Archival research uncovered that Operation Lysander appeared briefly in a classified index of wartime initiatives under the heading Counter-Radar Research, Section 9. Internal correspondence between the Air Ministry and the Admiralty described an objective to render airborne units undetectable by German radar using frequency-absorptive materials. While the official account claimed the project was abandoned after early failures, the recovered documents told a different story. The spectral reflection chamber mentioned in Lieutenant CMDR Holden's log matched the specifications of a facility once located beneath the same airfield, constructed in 1944 for controlled radiation testing. Personnel records listed 23 staff members assigned to Section 9 between January and June 1945. Only 6 were confirmed alive after the war. The others were listed as transferred or non-operational. When forensic teams analyzed the skeletal remains found inside the vault, results indicated abnormal levels of beryllium and tungsten embedded in the bone marrow, metals consistent with high-temperature alloy exposure. Further tests dated the deaths to between 1946 and 1948, contradicting the official closure date of the base. The Ministry of Defense, when questioned, issued a statement, asserting that no human trials were conducted in the course of radar countermeasure research, and that any implications otherwise are speculative. But internal MOD emails obtained by whistleblower accounts suggest that the government had known about the sealed chamber for decades. A 1981 memo from the Defense Infrastructure Organization referred to unopened sublevel under 3C, unsafe, to remain sealed per Directive 1180. By early 2024, Delaney had pieced together a partial chronology. Operation Lysander had originated in 1943 under the leadership of physicist Dr. Ernest Rowe, a specialist in electromagnetic reflection. His correspondence with the Admiralty's Scientific Intelligence Division indicated collaboration with US researchers working on stealth materials at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory. But unlike the Americans, the British project seemed to have pursued a human factor, the use of biological monitoring during exposure tests. One recovered logbook fragment contained biometric readings labeled only as Subject A, Pilot. Volunteer! The entries documented escalating physiological stress during field synchronization, ending with a final note. Subject unresponsive. Visual absence confirmed. Experts remain divided on what visual absence referred to. Some argue it was a metaphor for radar invisibility. Others, that the subject had literally disappeared from visual detection under experimental conditions. The missing flight mentioned in Halden's notes, an unrecorded night run over the Welsh coast, coincides with a civilian report from April 1945 describing a plane of unknown design crashing into the sea near Aberystwyth. No wreckage was ever officially recovered, but sonar scans conducted by marine researchers in 2022 revealed metallic debris consistent with 1940s aircraft alloys, lying 60 meters below the surface. The British government has declined to authorize recovery. Today, the Lincolnshire airfield remains sealed under official order. The entrance to the vault has been reburied. The recovered artifacts transferred to undisclosed MOD facilities. But a single film reel labelled Test Footage, Aberystwyth, 1945, was leaked online in early 2024 by an anonymous source. The 32-second clip shows a small craft accelerating down a foggy runway, then vanishing mid-frame, no explosion, no debris. The footage ends with the silhouette of a man standing beside a camera, his voice barely audible over static. Test complete, no return signal. What followed for nearly 80 years was silence. Chapter 2. The Halden Transmissions. In January 2024, 6 months after the Lincolnshire Vault discovery, a historian at the Imperial War Museum named Dr. Matthew Harker came across a series of unindexed magnetic tapes stored within a mislabeled crate donated by a private collector. The crate bore the faded insignia of the Air Ministry's Communications Division and the handwritten tag, Return to AMRD Section 9. When examined under ultraviolet light, one tape revealed the etched serial code LYS9 HT456. It was an exact match to the code sequence found on documents retrieved from the Operation Lysander vault. After consulting audio preservation specialists, the tapes were restored at the British Library's Sound Archive under strict supervision. What emerged from the playback would reopen one of the most quietly buried chapters of Britain's wartime research. The first recording, dated March 27, 1945, begins with a male voice introducing himself as Lieutenant CMDR Philip Halden, Supervising Engineer, Section 9. His tone is measured, precise, occasionally broken by static interference. He describes the initiation of Trial 4 reflective wave nullification. In the background, metallic hums and what appear to be low-frequency resonance tones echo through the chamber. Holden instructs an unseen team to stabilize current flow to 90 milliamps, before confirming visual sync achieved. At the 32-minute mark, there is a sudden shift in the recording, a burst of static followed by several seconds of silence. Then Holden's voice returns, quieter, trembling. Observer 2 is reporting shadow displacement, subject's outline indistinct, requesting medical presence immediately. The tape ends with a loud metallic snap and a brief human cry, cut short mid-breath. Subsequent reels labeled Trial 5 and Trial 6 reveal an escalating pattern of instability. Test operators reference biometric oscillation and light field variance in proximity to the test subject. Each entry concludes with Holden instructing personnel to purge secondary chamber logs. Cross-referencing his voice with RAF personnel files confirmed Holden's identity and tenure at the AMRD from 1943 to 1946, though official records list him as transferred to civilian service in 1947, yet no civilian employment records exist under his name beyond that year. His family reported him missing in 1948, though no investigation was ever conducted. The corroded dog tags recovered from the Lincolnshire vault bear the partial inscription P. Hal, believed to be his. The discovery of the tapes was never meant for public release. Dr. Harker's initial inquiry to the Ministry of Defence was met with silence, followed by a formal request from the Defence Intelligence Service for temporary custody of the materials. By that point, however, Harker had already made digital copies for preservation. The digitized versions circulated briefly among private researchers specializing in military acoustics before being suppressed under the Official Secrets Act. One researcher, acoustic engineer Lydia Croft, noted an abnormal pattern in the frequency spectrum of the recordings, subharmonic pulses recurring every 11.3 seconds. She cross-referenced the pattern against known equipment and found no technological explanation consistent with 1940s analog machinery. The rhythm resembled modern sonar pings, suggesting the tapes may have been partially re-recorded over in a later decade. But the dates etched into the reels, confirmed authentic by metallurgical analysis, placed their manufacture in early 1945. Digging deeper, Croft located an internal Air Ministry file at the Q archives labelled AMRD COM9113. The file, once restricted, contained memos from Holden to the Directorate of Scientific Intelligence discussing the acoustic synchronization effect observed during reflective wave trials. In one note dated April 6, 1945, Holden wrote, "Acoustic distortion corresponds directly to electromagnetic phase shifts. Recommend isolation of human test subjects beyond threshold exposure. Current shielding insufficient." 2 days, later, the Directorate responded curtly, "Continue at your discretion. Results to be delivered to Admiralty per Directive 14B." There was no record of a subsequent report. What happened in that chamber remains undocumented, except for the final reel. The last tape, LYS9HT457, begins abruptly. Static dominates the first 10 minutes. Then, faintly, a man's voice whispers, "Run cancelled, chamber unsealed, subject unresponsive, echo persists." The word echo repeats, over and over, each time more distorted, as if the recording were looping on itself. Analysts who studied the audio waveform claim that beneath the distortion lies an embedded pattern, an interference tone carrying modulated speech frequencies outside the range of human hearing. When decoded using digital compression modeling, fragments of phrases emerge: flight, reflection stable, light absent. Experts debate whether these are actual words or auditory artifacts, but the effect is undeniably human. When the existence of the Holden tapes became known to Parliament's Defence Committee, questions were raised regarding ethical boundaries of wartime research. The Ministry of Defence responded in writing, claiming, "No evidence exists to substantiate reports of human experimentation under Operation Lysander." However, an unclassified memo from 1972, signed by Air Vice Marshal Robert Ainsworth, refers to containment procedures for Sub-Level 3 test site, Holden file sealed under Act 247. The date corresponds precisely with an earthquake reported near Lincolnshire that year, which local residents recalled as a tremor that cracked the old runway. Seismographic data showed a minor event centered exactly beneath the former Section 9 facility. In March 2024, Dr. Harker resigned from the Imperial War Museum. 2 weeks later, he vanished while traveling to Wales for research related to Aberystwyth coastal archives. His car was later found abandoned near the Corris slate mines, ignition on, doors locked from the outside. In the passenger seat was a manila envelope containing a single microcassette labeled HT Backup Copy 1. Its contents have never been publicly disclosed, though an audio technician who handled the material described hearing a faint aircraft engine idling underwater. WWII. Within months, any reference to Harker's name was scrubbed from the museum's official directories. Today, the Holden tapes are rumoured to be stored at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory in Porton Down, under archive code DS-LYS AMRD12C. Access requires clearance above top secret. Independent researchers attempting to request samples under the Public Records Act have been denied on grounds of potential national security compromise. Yet digital traces of the files persist. Across encrypted academic networks, fragments of sound loops labelled Trial 6 Reflection Phase. So, for those who have listened, descriptions converge. The sound of static swelling into rhythm, like the heartbeat of a machine, followed by a voice murmuring from the dark. He saw the sky fold. The voice, according to spectral analysis, is a match for Lahont. Siemder Philip Holden. Chapter 3. The Aberystwyth Retrieval Operation. By late 2024, the investigation surrounding Operation Lysander had shifted from archival recovery to field exploration. The discovery of sonar anomalies off the Welsh coast, first documented by marine researchers from Bangor University, suggested that the rumoured Aberystwyth test flight might not have been legend after all. In September of that year, under discreet authorization from the Ministry of Defence's Salvage and Marine Division, a covert recovery team was assembled. Its mission, to investigate metallic debris lying 60 metres beneath Cardigan Bay at coordinates 52-24-47N, 4-4-12W. The site was classified internally as Retrieval Zone 9 LYS. Officially, the team's operation did not exist. The initial dive logs, later leaked by an anonymous contractor, reveal the scope of what they found. Buried in silt and coralline sediment was the fractured nose section of an aircraft unlike any recorded in Royal Air Force inventories. Its structure was composed of interlaced metallic fibers, an alloy unknown to metallurgical databases from the 1940s. Fragments of riveted panels bore a faint serial code, R17 beta. Inside the cockpit, divers recovered a control yoke fused by heat, a flight recorder cylinder, and a single leather glove still clutching a rusted handle. The recovery manifest lists one item of special containment, a rectangular metal casing engraved with the initials PH. That artifact has never been seen again. The operation was conducted over 6 days aboard the survey vessel HMS Triton, under the cover of a routine seabed mapping exercise. Divers reported interference with sonar and camera equipment within a 20-metre radius of the wreckage. One entry from the Dive Leader's Journal, dated September 14th, states, "Readings unstable, instruments flicker as if shadowed underwater. Feels like magnetic distortion, but not consistent. Crew uneasy." The interference grew stronger as recovery progressed. When the cockpit canopy was breached, electrical systems aboard the Triton temporarily failed. The blackout lasted 37 seconds. Data recorders from the vessel show no electromagnetic anomaly, as if the incident had been erased from the instruments themselves. By the third night, the operation was halted without explanation. MOD officials arrived via helicopter at dawn, boarded the Triton, and ordered the immediate cessation of all dives. They took custody of the recovered materials and issued a non-disclosure directive under the Defence Secrets Act. Crew members were later instructed to sign Form DS-441, an oath prohibiting them from discussing unauthorized retrievals in restricted waters. However, one crewman, speaking anonymously to journalist Sarah Delaney months later, described the moment the wreckage was lifted to the surface. He claimed that the aircraft's inner panels emitted a dull blue reflection, like light trapped under metal, and that when exposed to daylight, the reflection vanished entirely, Parallel to the recovery, Delaney traced archival evidence linking the Aberystwyth region to post-war RAF cleanup operations. Declassified transport records. Air 29 4537, detail and 1947. Cargo manifest listing hazardous metallic components. Transferred from Aberporth Range to Aldermaston under escort. The transport was marked Return to AMRD, Section 9 Materials. In the margins of one manifest, a handwritten note reads, Sample unstable, visual phase lost after exposure. Historians reviewing the entry identified the handwriting as that of Dr. Ernest Rowe, the physicist who led Operation Lysander's theoretical division. Rowe disappeared in 1952 following a car accident on the A34. His body was never recovered. A surviving colleague later described Rowe's demeanor during his final months as haunted by something invisible he claimed to have seen. In early 2025, a small collective of independent divers led by marine archaeologist Owen Llewellyn conducted an unsanctioned dive near the same coordinates using autonomous submersibles. The footage they captured shows the seabed crater where the wreckage had been, now empty. But more disturbing than the absence of debris was the surrounding seabed itself. The sand and rock appeared vitrified, melted into smooth glass-like formations consistent with intense, localized heat. When Llewellyn submitted sediment samples for analysis, the results showed trace elements of beryllium, tungsten, and a synthetic polymer not catalogued until the mid-1960s. Experts could not explain how such material appeared in an alleged WWII crash site. Within weeks of his publication attempt, Llewellyn's footage was removed from all hosting platforms under copyright claim by Crown Defence Holdings Ltd, a shell corporation with no public registry. Meanwhile, Delaney pursued another lead, an internal letter from the Admiralty Archives referencing Project Vantage transferred materials from Lysander. The letter, dated October 1946, confirmed that portions of an unidentified airframe were stored at Porton Down for containment analysis. Among the attached appendices was a photograph showing 3 men in lab coats standing beside a metallic section of fuselage. One of the men, identified as Dr. Rowe, appeared visibly blurred, not by camera motion, but by light distortion surrounding his outline. Forensic examination of the image later found no sign of digital alteration. It had been taken with a Leica Threik, standard for the period. The implications of the Aberystwyth retrieval reached beyond historical interest. Reports surfaced of MOD scientists visiting the site weeks after the operation, collecting seawater samples and erecting monitoring buoys marked with radiation hazard symbols. When questioned by Parliament, the Defence Minister stated the buoys were standard maritime navigational markers. However, Freedom of Information requests filed by Delaney revealed internal emails referencing radiation anomaly persistence near Site 9LYS. Independent testing by Bangor. University's Oceanographic Lab detected low-level isotopic traces consistent with beryllium decay, an element present in the skeletal remains recovered from the Lincolnshire vault. By December 2025, the Aberystwyth investigation had become a matter of quiet national controversy. While official agencies maintained silence, a leaked MOD briefing titled Post-Recovery Assessment, Operation Lysander, Phase 4, circulated among defence analysts. The briefing concluded with a single line. Recovered material exhibits non-standard optical characteristics consistent with predicted reflection nullification effects. Human testing logbooks remain missing. Below it, handwritten in pencil, was a note from an unnamed reviewer. Do not reopen Chamber 3C. Containment threshold uncertain. No such chamber has been publicly acknowledged, but satellite imagery of the Lincolnshire airfield shows renewed activity. Temporary structures, floodlights, and unmarked vehicles stationed around runway 3C. The sea off Aberystwyth has returned to its quiet surface, the waves washing endlessly over the site of what may be one of the most extraordinary and horrifying technological pursuits of the Second World War. Yet those who witnessed the wreckage firsthand recall a final, unshakable image, the cockpit glass, reflecting nothing, as if the ocean itself refused to appear upon it. That reflection, or its absence, remains the most haunting evidence of Operation Lysander's legacy. Chapter 4. The Rowe Correspondence Files. In February 2025, archivist Emily Cartwright of the National Archives received a sealed wooden case during a routine intake of estate. donations from the descendants of physicist Dr. Ernest Rowe. The case bore a brass plaque engraved with the serial Emerdy Rowe 14B and a wax seal imprinted with the crest of the Air Ministry. Inside were 34 envelopes tied with cord, several of which contained carbon copies of letters exchanged between Rowe and senior officials from the Directorate of Scientific Intelligence between 1943 and 1947. The discovery, though unpublicized, was catalogued under restricted accession code NA Mod 2025-LYS. When Cartwright opened the first envelope, she found the header, Operation Lysander, Personal Observations, E. Rowe, Ph.D. 1945. The earliest letters are written in clipped, technical prose typical of scientific correspondence from the period. Rowe describes advances in reflection frequency dampening and the use of composite alloys to neutralize radar signatures. But by late 1944, his tone changes. He references psychological degradation in personnel exposed to test emissions and interference patterns perceptible to human subjects. In one particularly troubling letter dated December 3, 1944, Rowe writes, "Phase synchronization causes visual distortions around the object. Observers report momentary absence of form. Audible resonance follows. Recommend halting human proximity during trials." His superior, Air Commodore Alan Trench, responded tersely, "Advisement noted. Continue per Directive 14B. Maintain civilian silence." Among the documents was a small black notebook labelled Private, Not for Directorate. Within its pages were sketches of wing profiles and equations scribbled in pencil beside personal remarks. Holden insists the subject survived contact, but what he describes defies light physics. He claims it folded him. Another entry, written in March 1945, reads, "They want the human factor to stabilize reflection. The material alone is insufficient. They intend to merge field and pilot. The handwriting grows erratic, letters slanted, ink smeared by trembling hands." Analysts who later examined the notebook under magnification found salt residue consistent with sweat, suggesting the pages were written in extreme stress. Cartwright's discovery quickly drew the attention of military historians and intelligence analysts. The Ministry of Defense dispatched representatives to evaluate security sensitivity. Yet before they arrived, Cartwright digitized several pages for record integrity. These images, circulated quietly among trusted colleagues, revealed something chilling. References to post-exposure syndrome type L, a condition described by Rowe as temporary spatial dislocation, visual distortion of surroundings, and auditory feedback resembling delayed echoes. He attributes these symptoms to prolonged exposure to reflective wave, oscillations during pilot synchronization. The phrase spatial dislocation appears 3 times. Underlined, another letter, dated April 9, 1945, just 4 days before the final test flight at Aberystwyth, includes a direct reference to Lieutenant CMDR Holden. P. Holden reports successful phase alignment. Subject A maintains consciousness during reflective null state. Visibility lost for 0.8 seconds. Reappeared disoriented, unable to perceive light properly. Skin luminous under test frequency. He begged to stop. The word begged is circled in graphite. Rowe concludes, "I have warned them again. This is not physics. It is annihilation through reflection." When forensic document specialists authenticated the materials, they discovered traces of beryllium oxide dust along the notebook's binding, the same element later found in the remains from the Lincolnshire vault. The connection was undeniable. Rowe's research, long dismissed as speculative, had evidently continued in secrecy after the war's end. Several letters reference post-war consolidation under Project Ashgrove, which investigators believe to be a post-1946 MOD initiative to absorb experimental divisions under new civilian fronts. One memo from that period, on letterhead from the Ministry of Supply, lists a budget allocation for optical field containment studies conducted at Aldermaston, a precursor to Britain's atomic weapons establishment. The name Rowe appears in the margins, followed by a scrawled note, "For transfer, silent file." In March 2025, Cartwright was contacted by Sarah Delaney, who had been following every thread of the Lysander story. Together, they reviewed over 300 pages of correspondence and assembled a timeline of Rowe's final years. He appeared to have grown increasingly paranoid. In 1951, he wrote to a colleague in Edinburgh, They want the light itself. They believe invisibility is control. They do not understand what we made disappear. 1 month later, his laboratory was raided under official warrant for national security investigation. No records of the raid survive, and no equipment was ever recovered. Rowe was declared deceased the following year after a vehicle accident, though police records from the time list his car as found empty, engine warm. Modern analysis of his final letters suggests he had intended to meet with American counterparts in Washington to discuss containment breaches related to Operation Lysander. He never arrived, yet his last surviving document, written on a single torn sheet, provides perhaps the most haunting clue of all. They think they lost a plane. They lost a man inside a mirror. The handwriting ends mid-sentence, as if interrupted. By mid-2025, the Rowe correspondence files were officially seized and reclassified under MOD Order DSTL Rowe LYS 9. Archivist Cartwright resigned 2 weeks later, citing undue pressure from external agencies. She later confided to Delaney that a night before the seizure, she had noticed the brass plaque on the case beginning to tarnish in an irregular pattern. Dark streaks resembling fingerprints. When tested for residue, no human oils were found. The metal itself appeared to have oxidized only where light struck its surface, as if reacting selectively to observation. The Rowe correspondence remains sealed under Section 4 of the Defense and Security Records Act. Digital duplicates allegedly exist within private servers across Europe, traded quietly among researchers under the codename Mirror Archive. Yet one particular scan, Image 17A, continues to circulate despite multiple takedown attempts. It shows a hand-drawn diagram of a Crescent aircraft, annotated in Rowe's handwriting. When reflection is total, nothing remains to reflect. Beneath it, a single word is underlined twice, Aberystwyth. Chapter 5. The Declassification Order of 2025. On the morning of August 8, 2025, the British National Archives published its quarterly list of newly declassified materials under the Public Records Act. Buried among the routine listings, agricultural directives, post-war trade records, and naval inventories, was a single line that would ignite one of the most controversial releases in modern defense history. AMRD LYS 4578. Operation Lysander. Reflective Field Trials, 1943-47. Within hours, researchers across the world downloaded the 326-page file set before it was abruptly withdrawn from the database. The Ministry of Defense later claimed the publication had been premature, citing classification errors. But by then, the documents were already archived offline by dozens of civilian historians. Among them was Sarah Delaney, who had spent 3 years tracing the buried truth behind the name Operation Lysander. The released files included high-resolution scans of internal memoranda, engineering blueprints, and personnel rosters. Many were familiar from earlier leaks, but several pages had never been seen before. The most significant was a report marked Post-Trial Assessment, April 1945. The author's name had been redacted, but the signature block contained the faint imprint of a rubber stamp reading Scientific Division, AMRD, Section 9. The report summarized an experiment codenamed Field Synchronization Test 7A, conducted at 22:40 hours on April 11, 1945. The subject, designated Pilot Volunteer Number 4, Lieutenant CDR P. Halden, entered an experimental aircraft coated in reflective material R-17 beta. Upon ignition of the onboard field generator, radar contact ceased instantly. Witnesses reported visual disappearance lasting 0.8 seconds, followed by the craft's reappearance with structural deformation and partial pilot incapacitation. The pilot was evacuated from the cockpit alive, but non-responsive to light stimuli. The report ends with a recommendation: suspend further human testing. Material unstable. Field collapse yields unknown physiological effects. A second note, handwritten in pencil beneath the typed paragraph, reads, Subject A deceased at 23:12. Maintain silence. Following the release, independent analysts verified the authenticity of the paper stock watermark and typing anomalies consistent with 1940s Royal Air Force forms. The documents bore marginal annotations in 2 different inks, one believed to be from Dr. Ernest Rowe, the other from an unidentified reviewer. One annotation in particular drew attention. Next to a line describing reflective null phase achieved, Rowe had written, not null, reversed. The reviewer responded beneath it. Then God help us. The page's upper corner was torn away, as if deliberately removed. Photographs of the reverse side revealed faint mirror impressions of writing, barely legible under infrared. Subject reported seeing himself from outside. A subsequent file, LYS 9, Appendix D, Resource Disposal, details an emergency operation to transport non-stable alloys and organic residues from Lincolnshire to Aldermaston in July 1947 for incineration. However, the corresponding transportation logs list 5 sealed containers, while later MOD summaries record only 4 destroyed. The missing 5th container is unaccounted for. Its label, referenced in a marginal note, reads Containment, Material, Subject Fusion. Historians now speculate this may have referred to the mysterious rectangular casing marked with the initials PH recovered from the Aberystwyth wreck in 2024. The implications of that connection are still debated, though one internal MOD email leaked later that year referenced latent energy readings from R17 residues consistent with active field resonance. Within days of the declassification, the government initiated an internal review. The Defense Secretary issued a statement emphasizing the importance of preserving public confidence in the integrity of archival materials. Yet privately, Defense Intelligence began seizing independent copies of the Lysander files under national security orders. University research servers hosting the documents were subpoenaed. Delaney, who had already archived the materials offline, went underground, releasing redacted extracts through encrypted academic networks under the alias S. Drake. Her final message before disappearing in October 2025 read simply, "He never left the cockpit." Meanwhile, evidence of renewed experimentation surfaced. Satellite imagery obtained by open-source analysts showed activity at the decommissioned RAF Lincolnshire site, fresh tyre tracks, portable generators, and floodlights illuminating the sealed hangars. 2 nights later, residents of nearby villages reported a low-frequency hum resonating across the fields. Power outages followed. Local police dismissed the events as infrastructure testing, yet eyewitnesses described beams of diffused light emerging from the clouds, like reflections of something that wasn't there. No official explanation was given. 1 week later, an internal MOD memorandum, leaked anonymously, included a chilling notation: phase replication successful, containment holding, personnel debrief pending. Forensic linguists who examined the newly released Operation Lysander documents have noted an absence of standard classification markings on several key pages. Instead, those pages bear a faint watermark reading R17 continuance. Such markings did not exist in any official wartime classification system. Some interpret it as a later addition, a signal that the project or its derivatives continued under different names. References in separate files mention Project Ashgrove, Operation Meridian, and Phase Reflection Reclamation, all dated post-1958. Each project stated objective, advancement of adaptive optical systems. Whether these are benign camouflage technologies or successors to the original Lysander experiments remains unknown. Today, the official narrative stands unchanged. Operation Lysander was a short-lived wartime effort to explore radar-deflective materials, abandoned due to technical impracticalities. Yet beneath that bureaucratic statement lies a growing body of evidence, archival fragments, testimonies, and physical anomalies that suggest the experiment achieved something more profound and catastrophic. As Delaney once wrote in her final recorded interview, "If invisibility was their goal, they found it, but they also found what happens when a man becomes unseen, not to others, but to himself." The final page of the declassified file set, page 326, contains no text, only a grainy photograph affixed to a faded report header. The image shows a fog-covered runway and the outline of a small aircraft preparing for takeoff. In the bottom margin, a handwritten caption appears faintly in pencil: Aberystwyth, Test 7A, Camera B. Directly below it, underlined twice, are 3 words that have since become the defining phrase of the Lysander file: Test complete. No return signal.